Hi everyone, this is Dr Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode on mobilisations, activations, and lengthenings. How are you today, Soph?
I'm very well. This is a big topic in the horse world. Lots of talk about all of these things. And today we're hoping to create a little bit of clarity for anybody who's listening, because one, these are, like we just said, really hot topics there, and they're words that are thrown around a lot for different things. And it's important because these are key tools in everybody's equine functional posture journey.
Yeah, like these exercises, we're not going to go into the details of all the exercises. Our equine functional posture course goes into them in a lot of detail, but it's really, discussing, like you said, they're so valuable in any training program to aid in creation of that functional posture and strength in the correct postural muscles. And like you said, I myself have used these terms incorrectly, like especially, I just kind of thought of everything as stretching, and I never knew about activations for quite a long time. But I think activations are probably something that's changed my life and changed my horse's life. So yeah, people might know of, they might do exercises with their horses using carrots or treats. And a lot of these exercises can be done with or without carrots or treats. It really depends. And I think one important thing that I would like to say is it's really important, whether you're doing a mobilization, an activation, or a lengthening, your horse's awareness and your awareness of your horse is really important. So it's not a trained response as such. Like I've seen it trained, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You're still putting the horse through the motion, but the more awareness the horse can have of itself, and the more you can be aware of the horse in any exercise, the more feedback you're going to get, and the more connected the horse is going to be to their body. So they're going to be able to respond. And if something is sore, something is restricted, something is pulling, something is really comfortable, you're going to be able to see it. Whereas sometimes when things are trained or they're super focused on the treat,
you
lose that like communication pathway. So it just reduces your, what's the word, like reduces kind of what you can gain out of doing these exercises.
Right.
So then it comes down to treat etiquette, because so for Jelly, he used to be like so rude when it came to treats. He was obsessed. And so when people say to me, I can't do, mobilizations or lengthenings because my horse is obsessed with the treats, I'm like, you need to be extremely consistent, patient, persistent, and just like have really clear boundaries and know what those boundaries are. So Jelly would he'd just be obsessed. He'd just be hooked onto the treat. He had no thought process of his limbs or anything. And he'd just be like, give me the treat. So 2 ways that I did it was like, one way was, every time he was like that, I'd put the treat behind my back and just like turn and ignore him until he got back into his own little mind and body. Or the other way was if he was being really rude on my hand, like I would hold my hand in a fist, a closed fist with the treat inside my fist. And if he was biting me or anything, I'd just gently bump his nose until he just touched his muzzle or licked me. And I've done that with all of my horses, and they were all grabby except for Patch.
Yes.
Who's always really polite. And they're so polite now. Like, I just wait. If Jelly's getting a bit obsessed, I'm just like, I just wait, and then he's like, oh yeah.
Have
Okay,
to
I'm
be
ready
polite.
now.
Yep.
Have you had that experience with treats?
I definitely have. I've had probably two different ends of the spectrum. One who, you know, was actually like, God, you're so slow and you're not really that motivated. And always trying to look for something, you know, they're kind of like, oh, I'll stretch, but I'm not that, you know, driven for it. And then you're sort of looking for ways to be creative. And then you're always, when they feel better, it's easier. So they'll work, you know, it's not as difficult for them to look for it. And then I've also had the other option, very lippy horses who always get a top lip over your finger and things like that. And then being creative, like chopping up carrots before I go out, using big handfuls of loosened chaff instead of a treat because it keeps their mouth fuller for longer.
Grade.
Yep.
Or lower value treat.
Yes. Yep. So that's definitely being creative about things like that. And for another one, there's a great stretch where, you know, the horse is looking out in front, and it took me a little while to learn I need to cut my carrot into sticks because I can't get them to eat pellets or pieces of carrot out of my hand in this position. And then learning, just a few tricks like that, you know, there's creativity involved in the process.
Yeah, and everyone does that a little bit differently. Like I've learned how to release a little piece of carrot from my hand. So I cut mine most often into little pieces. And one of the reasons I ended up doing that was I found, and this is for different stretches to what you're talking about then, but what I found, if I had bigger pieces, they'd go to grab it, and then sometimes my fingers would, you know, be in the way. Whereas I had little pieces, I could keep my fist closed and then just release it.
Yep.
So, you know, different people have different ways of releasing the treat. So the other aspect is, so that's treat etiquette. That's really important if you're going to use treats. There's always an option though, if for some reason you just can't use treats. And I'll just go back and say, if your horse is not interested, which you touched on,
yes,
generally because it's like you're asking too much, you know, so it might be that they don't understand the value of treats. You do get some off the track thoroughbreds where they've never had a carrot or an apple, or they've never been offered a treat. So that's definitely a value. But I've also seen the other end where the horse started offering a little bit, but then very quickly its range of comfort was exceeded, and it was already dealing with a lot in its body, and it just went, you know what, this is way too hard.
Right.
I don't care how much I love carrots. My body is not comfortable, and they just shut down. So you've got to be mindful of that, especially if you're starting exercises like this and your horse has never done them, or they're an older horse with a lot of stiffness. You've got to be very mindful of their comfortable barrier of motion.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the different types of stretches. So do you want to define, we've got active and passive.
So these are two branches within stretches rather than activations.
Yeah, I guess you can use them in activations, mobilisations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. Actually, I did think that as soon as I said it. So for active stretches or activations, the horse is involved in the process. So they are motivated to do something for some reason, whether or not that's you asking them to reach for a carrot, they're the ones doing the stretch. So they're putting the stretch around. Or if they are, some people I've seen have clicker trained a flag. If they are got nose on the flag and they're reaching around, that's active. And your other option is passive. And that is where the horse is being guided. So I might be holding a leg up and I'm directing the leg into a stretch, or I might be using my arms to direct the horse's neck and head around my body for a stretch. And so that's a passive stretch. Active, the horse is doing the action. Passive, I am doing the action.
Yeah, and the way I remember it is passive, the horse is passive, so I'm doing it, or I'm not doing it and the horse is active.
Yep.
So, and yeah, in an activation, like an example of an active activation would be like a horse eating out of a hay net.
Yes.
Activating their muscles by just going through the process of eating. And an example of a passive activation would be, like me having my hand on the wither and rocking it from side to side. So I'm getting like muscle activation through the pectoral muscles through there. So yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, but it's just sharing that definition and the fact that there's many ways we can create the same thing. Like it's not, you don't have one stretch that does this and one activation that does that. Like I'm often problem solving different horses, like how can I get that muscle to activate, or how can I get that muscle to lengthen, or so there's lots of different ways that can be applied. One of the keys, like when we talk about any of these, is that you need to monitor and listen to your horse. And I've talked, like we just mentioned about developing that two-way communication and the presence. But if your horse is giving up or grabbing the carrot or becoming rude or moving their legs or doing any other, I guess, aversive behavior, then there's a reason. They're not just being annoying. Like when Jelly steps away from me when I'm doing an activation, I'm like, oh, I need to check his hip or his psoas or his pelvic motion or something. He doesn't just step away from me because he's like, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So that's really important.
Another thing to consider is warm-ups and when and where you should be doing your warm-ups in relation to your mobilizations, lengthening, and activations. We'll go into it in each topic, but sometimes you will use a dynamic mobilization routine as part of a warm-up. And then in other times, and depending on the horse, they might need to have gone for a warm-up beforehand, or before you're going to do your lengthening exercises, or before you're going to do your activations.
Yeah, and I think that's also important to consider independently with your horse. Like if I'm in winter and you're in summer, that also creates a very different set of requirements. Like in winter, they generally require a bit more warm up. In summer, if it's like 30 degrees outside, you probably don't have to focus much time on the warm up because it's already warm. It'll depend on the age of your horse. It'll depend on their problems, their restrictions, their stiffness, what your aim is from the exercises. So I guess the point there is that there's recipes for exercises. However, it's really more beneficial if you tailor it to your own horse. So in the equine functional posture course, we cover all of this stuff, but at the end of the day, each individual, and that's why we have Q&As and things like that too, so they can get feedback from us, but so they can tailor it to their individual horse. And we might have, however many people in the course, and they're all doing these exercises a little bit differently.
Yeah.
That's
modifying and tailoring to their horse. And that's the same again, like you were just saying, for individuals, the same movement can be used as mobilization, a lengthening, or an activation, and it depends on the horse and how it's being applied to the horse as well.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where it gets confusing. Like when people see a photo on Facebook or something and they're like, oh, that person's doing it wrong or whatever. It's like, well, they don't know if that person is doing a mobilization, an activation, or a lengthening. Like your body position can be very different depending on, and the positions that you ask the horse to get into can be very different depending if you're which one you're applying. So always be careful of judging a moment in time. So when we talk about just general value of these exercises, so there's one muscle that's like really important in these, and that's the multifoot eye. And I guess the reason that we have we have established the importance of this muscle is because there's quite a number of human studies showing how, and there's some horse studies now too, but showing how it atrophies or gets smaller and weaker with humans and horses with back pain. And so, and they've also shown how the stability of the back improves and the postural stability, which we've talked about postural stability, have we?
Yes. We've touched on it so far.
Yeah. So and how that improves when the multifoot eye is more well developed. And so I've done I've done obviously a lot of dissections, but I've done an anatomy in clay course with equinology. And building the multifoot eye muscle is like so complex. So it has like 5 bundles and they're crossing multiple vertebrae. So like from each vertebrae, there's like 5, and so it's such a complex muscle bundles that are just so important for that functional stabilization of the spine. And the fact that we then put weight on our horse's back, so through riding them,
yeah,
we are constantly putting those multifoot eye under strain. The type 1 muscle fibers, if they're not trained adequately to a place of strength,
yeah,
they just fatigue. And then the long back muscles, like the bigger muscle groups, have to take over. And then, there's this underlying reduction of stability in the spine. And then we have arthritis happening within the spine and kissing spine and roach backs and core like
so many.
overloading. And then you get distal limb joint problems and tendon problems. So this little multifoot eye, they're like super important. Yeah, did you want to add anything else? Or I just talked all about that because I'm like really passionate about it.
I just think it's a muscle that isn't as spoken about, and we're going to do an episode on the value of appreciating all the muscles, in the body, how they all have value for different things. They offer a form of movement, stability, feedback for the horse. The multifoot eye, because they travel all the way along the spine as well, they're so integral the whole way along.
Yeah, like all the way from the head to the tail. Like
it's so, yep.
Different components in the head because the obliques are potentially considered part of the multifoot eye, but it literally goes all the way along the tail.
Yeah, they're really, really valuable. And especially the things that we're talking about, like, all of those issues you mentioned, most of those are things that come on over time. They can be chronic issues or they can be an acute, but often they're chronic issues. They're gradual, they're posturally related, and it has a big influence on your horse's longevity.
Yeah.
It's better to build and maintain your multifoot eye and their strength than it is to have to bring them back, but it also is possible to bring them back and to re-recruit them and strengthen them.
As long as you strengthen them appropriately before you start loading them with riding. I think that's where we make a big boo-boo a lot of the time is we think we can train with them with riding, and as far as I'm aware, the studies have not been done to show that that's possible.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting because that's, you know, the old top line is built with riding discussion. But anyway, we'll come back to, so we're going to talk specifically now about each of them. So mobilizations, lengthenings, and activations. So the key thing with mobilizations is that they're less than 15-second hold. And in a lot of the studies, they've just used 5 seconds for 3 to 5 reps. And you can do them more often. So you can do them, like a lot of the studies have done them for 5 days a week, over anywhere from 7 weeks to 3 months, and looked at the changes in the multifidi specifically, but also in postural stability. So a lot of horses can't hold a position initially for more than 15 seconds. So a lot of our horses are starting, and I always start them off dynamically. And because I think it's important to stay within your horse's comfortable range initially, but then ask for a little bit more, because sometimes I see horses that are doing the mobilizations and there's nothing happening in the back.
Right.
And so if there's nothing happening in the back, you're not going to get increased multifidi in there. Like the mobilization, so chin between the knees, or we call it nose to toes and beyond, it needs to get to the point where the back is becoming involved in it. Otherwise, you're not benefiting. So I'm always looking for a progression in my horse's ability, whether that's a little extra time that they're offering. I'm not forcing them to stay there, that they're offering, or they're getting a little bit further in how far they can go. Has that been your experience?
Yes, and it can be overwhelming in the beginning, especially when you see your horse and you think, how am I ever going to take this very small amount of quality motion that we have? Because with all of these exercises, quality over quantity in the beginning, throughout all the time, is really, really important, because the quality of the stretch determines the fact that you're going to be able to improve over time. And it feels like it's such a great big ask that you're going to get from a very small range of motion to, a really functional, open, mobile neck or thoracic. But the body wants to move well. And as you open up more space, sometimes you can't, it's even just below what you can see. But consistently repeating the work, all of a sudden you've got a beautiful lateral bend that includes the rib cage, and a reach out in front of the horse that stretches through the back and lengthens it and carries into the pelvis and the tail. And as there's a flow-on effect through the whole body, it just continues, because the muscles and the fascia continue along the body in chains, and they link all the way along. Have you found that?
Yeah, definitely. And like, I just find when people are doing it within the horse's capabilities, every day there's a little bit of improvement. So if you're not getting a little bit of improvement, either in the time they can hold or how far they can go, then there's something you're missing. So, and that could be that they're not coming down straight. It could be that your body position is blocking them. It could be that you haven't set them up for success. Like, you haven't started in a good posture, and that's really important. Like, don't just start stretching. Like, no one comes along to you and you're standing, in a bit of a slumpy position, like resting a leg, how we stand kind of one leg out. And if someone come up to you and then just picked up your leg and started doing a mobilization, like, you'd fall over, right? So before you do any mobilization or lengthening, you want to make sure that your horse looks in a balanced standing posture.
Yeah.
And Yeah, so you need to really think about that. If they are doing any, yeah, I think I've already said this, but like if they are giving you challenges or they're not improving, you need to ask the question why and perhaps get some help for that. An example, I think just giving some examples of mobilization. So like you've already mentioned some of the spine ones, and we mentioned like, you know, the chin between the carpus or the knees or the fetlock, like we call it nose to toes and beyond. And for me, it's not about where you're going, it's about where the horse can go, and then you work up to that ability to vary it.
Yes.
Peekaboo or lateral cervical flexions, like with the neck, with the ears parallel, and then eventually they'll be able to go further to, and like you said, the rib cage will come into it.
Yes.
And head and neck extension. What
Yes.
about like mobilizations for the limbs?
So it's generally, you know, each joint has directions of movement, whether that's flexion, extension, rotation, or circumduction, you know, the hip and the shoulder.
Yeah, so going around.
Yeah, like a pivot. And you can use those directions for these mobilizations as well. Sometimes that might look like adduction, abduction, combinations of taking the limb forward, back, out, and in, depending on what the horse needs and needs on that day, and what they can give you as well.
Yeah, and what you're trying to work on within their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, what your aims are.
Or what your workload was that day, like you might be combating the effects of that.
Definitely.
So the benefits of mobilizations, we've basically said it, like range of motion, improving range of motion or counteracting other movements that we do with our horses.
Yes.
Stimulating joint fluid, multifoot hypertrophy, and improve symmetry left to right, which has been shown in studies to improve that, which is really important when we want to ride them, that we can, you know, promote as much strength, like bilateral strength. And it can be protective against arthritis, and can improve restrictions related to arthritis when they're done carefully and correctly. You know, like there's no forcing or pushing or you know, asking excessive range of motion in this. So that's mobilization. So if we move into I just want to clarify. So mobilizations are less than 15 seconds, often 5 seconds for 3 to 5 reps. The other important thing that I just want to say, and this goes for all of these mobilizations, lengthenings, and activations, is giving them a rest between each set. So you might do 3 reps and you might do 3 sets. That rest I find is the most valuable part of this, because it allows everything to reset, and then the next time you ask the question, it's like the body, the nervous system, the muscles, spindles, all the stuff we're going to talk a bit more about have gone, oh, that was a new movement. Oh, let's try that again and see what range we have now. So it's, yeah, the rest is just as important as the exercise itself. Okay, so what's important about lengthening, or what people will know more as stretching?
So often the association of stretching is a very long, held, you know, one direction sort of stretch. And the general understanding is that over time, the body has the ability to stretch further, you know, for injury prevention and for flexibility and for the comfort and, you know, performance of the animal and their ability to reach and open up. Some important things to note in a difference from a mobilization is that this is 15 to 30 seconds.
Or anything greater than 15, yeah.
Yeah, greater than 15 seconds. And 1 to 2 reps is often sufficient for lengthening, whereas you often do, more reps, even, sets of repetitions for your mobilizations. So when you want to do some stretching, some lengthening, the horse needs to have been warm. And you mentioned earlier there's a difference in warm when you're in summer versus winter, but 5 minutes of trotting or 10 to 15 minutes of walking is a true warm-up. That's, the body's...
studies to show that actually warms up the muscles.
Yes. And this is something that you can often do post-work rather than before work, where you might be using your mobilizations as part of your warm-up. And if you can do this 2 to 3 times a week.
Yeah, I think that's an important differentiation to the mobilizations.
Yep.
Is the mobilizations you could do more often, like a lot of the studies that have looked at mobilizations have done them 5 days a week, over months.
Yeah.
Whereas with stretches, there's a, like, you don't want to overdo it, because you want to keep the muscles kind of active and building in their strength. So you want length, but you want what we call strength at stretch. And so, yeah, 2 to 3 times a week. And I'll often say, like, after a hard work session, so that's the most important time. Like if you have once or twice a week you jump, or you've done some cross country training, or something like, or you've done a competition, like they're the really important times to stretch, and they'll really help your recovery.
Yes.
At that time.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that there has been studies in humans showing that a combined time of greater than 30 seconds has
Greater
no...
than 90.
So thank you. 90 seconds has no greater benefit and could be detrimental. So when you're thinking about the timeline, it's actually important to be thinking like, okay, I could be using a timer for this, because it's very easy, the difference between 30 to 60 to 90 seconds, sometimes in the moment when you're there and it's maybe a limb is heavy, it's really valuable to use a timer. And that's worth thinking about as well, not doing that before you go out and you do a jumping round, because you're going to decrease your strength and could, put you and your horse in a less optimum position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. So, and I think if you just kind of aim for 2 times 30, that's a nice place. And to be honest, most horses, I mean, unless you're holding a limb, that's a different situation, right? Because the horse is passive and you're doing the stretch for them, so you can hold it for 30 seconds. But I find, like, with, say, nose to toes and beyond, most horses won't stay there for 30 seconds anyway. So, I'll just keep them there as long as they stay there, and I'll just do it a couple of times.
Yeah.
So you're pretty safe. But what you want to see is that back, if you're doing nose to toes, you want to see that back rounding and lengthening through there, especially if you've been just doing a hard ride, like that's been under compression, the multifidi been under stress, the back's been under extension often, not all the time. We're trying to improve that. But so then, yeah, doing the opposite, where you're just really giving that blood flow, getting that blood flow back into the fascia along the back into the muscles along the back, as well as just getting that movement and lengthening through all those little vertebrae, is super important. So one of the examples of a lengthening is a caudal tail traction, which obviously you should only do if you know how to do it. But there's been some studies to show, 20 seconds with a 10-second release, with 3 sets of that, reduce the pain in the lumbosacral area. So these can be very valuable when they're applied correctly, and you're actually getting the lengthening in the areas that you're aiming for.
Yes. And when you talk about correctly, there are, for each kind of stretch that you want to do, there's going to be certain things you look for. But in general, when you're coming in to do something with your horse, in order for them to be using the right things, you want to make sure that they're standing square. And that's so that You know,
Yeah.
if your horse is standing square, one, as you do an exercise one way and then the other way, you're going to be having a similar effect, you know. And another thing to look for is that when you're asking them to move, whether it's actively or passively, there's not going to be bending of their knees. So it's some horses, maybe those especially who are very eager to please, or they're really searching for the carrot, they will begin lunging for the carrot, or they might bend their knees as they're coming around. And at that point, you've gone beyond their functional range of motion, and the boundary, their boundary where they were going to get the benefit from that the best was further back than where that stretch has gone to. So it's not that you know, it's the end of the world if you get there, but having the awareness to see it and be watching for it means you can go, oh, I could have gone, you know, 10 or 20, even 30 centimeters back. And that is the point at which, you know, my horse isn't bracing, they're actually stretching.
Yeah, and oh, I was going to say something about that. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Also, if you know, if they give you some lean or bending of the knees or moving away or something like that, go back to neutral. So between each repetition, go back to neutral. So what the neutral posture for that horse, in balance, head in neutral. Don't try, like, as you get more experience, you can sometimes correct it in the moment. But initially, especially when you're teaching these horses, if you get into a position where they're not quite straight, they're showing some of the signs that Sophie just talked about, then go back to neutral, start again. You know, because then you're kind of just setting the body up. Okay, we're in neutral, let's go from here, rather than you're stuck in a twist or something and then you're trying to correct it, and then the brain and the nervous system and the muscles and everything don't register, like, oh, that's exactly what I need to do. And I think I see a lot of people, you know, make those mistakes. They don't go back to neutral, they don't move their own body, and yeah, and they're not always aware of crookedness.
Yeah. And something I just was thinking, talking about crookedness, is also one of the most crucial things that I encourage owners to look for when I'm showing them how I would recommend them doing stretches with their horses, is for twisting of the head and neck.
Yeah.
Twisting of the head and neck means that your horse is looking for another way to create bend through the head and neck. And that it's important. Pardon?
Cheating.
Cheating. And the thing is, there are a couple of different things to consider there. If you go out, do a stretch, and you see your horse turning the head and neck, one is that if you are asking the horse to stretch and they can't get the treat in your hand, a horse that can't achieve something is going to try something different. So they're going to move their head, they're going to try and stick out their tongue, or they're going to look for a different gap in your hand, and that includes twisting of the head and neck. And it's important not to mix that up with a horse who might consistently tilt their head, bend their neck, or you know, lean one way and do a big rotation through the base of their neck or their upper neck. You know, there's so many different directions in the head and neck they can move, rather than bending laterally straight and keeping their ears parallel to the ground, so that the head
Side one.
Yes. And that's something to look for too. You can go both ways and say, okay, my horse does in one direction bend or twist a certain way that they don't in the other, and I'm going to work within their boundaries. But that's a really big sign, as well as the bending of the knees and lunging, that you don't have a great straight stretch.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying there is that horses could be they could be trying to figure out what you want, and so they're trying to experiment with different positions.
Yep.
Or they could physically be unable to give you what you want, and so they're giving you different positions, and that's two very different reasons for them doing something. So it's and that comes down to your awareness, consistency, and understanding of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And it takes practice. It's not an overnight skill. It's not an overnight skill.
Yeah, we make it look easy because we've had a lot of practice with a lot of different horses.
Yeah. And the confidence to look messy the first time you do it.
And to, yeah, push the boundaries a little to see where your boundary is.
Yep.
Within reason. Like you want to know, okay, I asked a bit more and they did this. So right now my limit is here. And then maybe in a couple of days, I'll ask again and push the boundary again and see
Yep.
if the boundary has shifted. Because if you don't do that, you don't necessarily progress. Like you have to test where your boundary is every couple of sessions, not every session, not every time, not every repetition, but every, third session at least, you want to test your boundary.
Absolutely.
All
Which
right,
takes us to
activations. So activations are very exciting for me. We're always getting different patterns and activations of different muscles in motion. There's always certain muscles activating and relaxing. We call it an antagonist-agonist relationship in all movement. So that's a constant, right? Like we might have the abdominal muscles activating for going over trot poles, the quads activating more than the hamstrings when they're stepping over the pole. The hamstrings have to lengthen to reach for the next pole, but they have to contract so the leg doesn't just fly off forward. There's always these constant feedback relationships happening between muscles in the body. But the problem occurs when you have some muscles working harder than others in the relationship. So some muscles might be tight, they might be weak, they might be weak and tight, they might be weak and floppy, and basically they're not taking up their load. They're not pulling their weight. And so the benefit of activations has also been shown to aid in multifidi development and activations of specific core postural muscles, which we're going to talk more about these muscles in coming episodes, but like the longus colli, the middle gluteal, like the big butt muscle, the rectus abdominis, like these muscles have been shown to be active in specific activations. And so, yeah, these are just so important.
Absolutely. What is an example you've had, that you've seen either with you or Jelly that has been really profound progressing your journey with activations?
When I'm slack and I had like a disc problem, a year and a half ago now, a bit over, and my right glute specifically got very atrophied. And my right leg, still have numbness in my toes and things like that. If I don't do my activations before I ride and make sure that my right glute is on, which used to take me at least 3 sets of 15 squats, and I had to even do a few single leg squats to get it on. Like I could feel it. Like I would feel it be like blah, 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 floppy. And then I'd do some squats and one-legged squats, and then I'd go, oh, okay, it's switched on now.
Yep.
I didn't do that before riding. I noticed the difference in how Jelly goes.
Yep.
And the same with Jelly. If I don't do his activations before riding, so doing the activations were a game changer for Jelly. Like since I've been doing those, which, Debra and Patillo really highlighted, like I knew about them, but I wasn't actively doing them every time before I rode or every time before I worked. But now I do. And it tells me so much information. I'm like, okay, Jelly's happy. He's loading both of his back legs. He's happy to stand square. He feels good. He's not bracing against me. His pelvic motion is good. His belly lifts are good, like in the activations. He's activating his longus colli. So I'm like, I know before I get on, I'm going to have a good ride. If they're not right, I know I'm not going to have, he's not going to feel great today.
Yep.
So just so valuable.
Very valuable. And so, an activation in itself is when the nervous system sends electrical impulses and a muscle becomes activated. And so if you have influenced input to those muscles, whether that's, a decrease perhaps in the electrical stimulation to the muscle, that can come from a number of things: nerve damage, injuries, movement, and avoiding pain is a big one. So, it's not just the nerve was damaged and it can't send an impulse, although that can happen through compression or different things, but having, so I personally have experienced that. I have recently found that my left upper gluteal, if I'm not in a retraction and abduction position, it doesn't actually turn on.
Explain that.
So if I
if your leg's not out and
out
forward.
back out behind me and to the side,
Yeah.
then when I'm gripping that particular muscle, when I clench my butt cheek, I cannot feel it turn on, whereas my right side does. And in connecting a number of pieces with professionals I've seen for my own body, I have right knee pain, left SI pain. I have, a right quad that's bigger and inactive hamstrings. And so for me, creating input that's very intentional, so activating them, that looks like for me raking the muscles, doing a little stretch and intentional contraction of that space, and learning what small exercise uses that muscle as an individual, and it has a priming effect. So when I go to do an exercise, that muscle has already been primed with electrical impulses, so it snaps to attention and involves itself and recruits itself a lot faster for a movement. And then from that position, whatever workout or run I go to do, I get the benefit of, because the muscle has turned on.
Yeah, and you're not overloading, certain joints or something because your alignment is altered by your muscle activity.
Absolutely. And that's such a real tenet of posture, is that certain muscles are optimum, there's optimum activations of groups of muscles to do certain movements. And so if you have a horse who's doing a movement and using muscles that should be, doing a different kind of movement, then they're working so hard to carry out every kind of movement that horse does. So they might go into impulsion and they use their hamstrings. And then when they're standing around, they're also using their hamstrings because they're not recruiting their spinal stabilizers. And there's just so many, and all of a sudden those hamstrings, they're massive, they're tense, they don't have good flexibility, but they're also fatigued all the time because they've been working. And so it's also worth noting that when you begin activating muscles who haven't done much for a while, they will fatigue very quickly.
Yeah, really, really quickly. Yeah, and that's really important to recognize that, because it's not a matter of like you go, oh, I'll just switch it on. Oh, now my horse can do the thing. It's like, and I found that too with my glutes and stuff. Like I was trying to think, like I could walk a certain distance or a certain amount of time, but if I'd walked for, at the start it was maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And after 5 minutes of walking, I could feel like that my body wasn't able to push anymore. And then I'd start getting sore in my back, in my sacroiliac, and get sciatic pain or whatever, because the muscles had fatigued, because they just did not have the strength. And especially when we're rehabbing a horse, retraining or training a young horse, or even just an older horse that's never switched on their postural muscles, which I think there's a lot.
Yes.
We have to understand, and this is why I often say, a horse with a weak back or whatever, you need to get off them, because you've got to give those postural muscles enough time to get enough strength to be able to sustain and support the load that we're putting on them. And that takes a minimum of 3 months. And like even with Jelly, I'm a few years in now, and I'm still seeing improvements in those. I'm still seeing where certain muscles are not working as well as they should, and becoming more and more aware all the time about those different relationships between the muscles that are happening in his body. So yeah, and like I've just seen some crazy results when I've become more aware of patterns that are happening in individual horses. And I know, you have two, like we were talking about that one last night with the psoas. I think a lot of horses don't activate their psoas appropriately, which is a muscle that's underneath their lumbar vertebrae. And that's very tight and weak in a lot of horses, or asymmetrically activating, or asymmetrically weak and tight. Jelly, I think, is a big problem for that. And so, yeah, we not only have to get those muscles switching back on, we have to also build them up to being able to sustain a load.
Absolutely. Retraining that dominant neuromuscular pattern to
Yeah.
become a more functional one. And then when it's here and available for us, that then needs to be conditioned and built up as well. What are some examples of specific activations you know and use?
I think the most common one, which, like, again, Deborah and Patillo from Equinology highlighted for me, and then did it recently, like Nicole Rombach talked about her experience with ultrasounding postural muscles related to this, is the tail caudal weight shift. So we talked before about the tail traction, which is a very different exercise. And this is the tail caudal weight shift, which again, you only do it if you've been shown how to do it properly, because you don't want the horse bracing against you. You want to make sure they're activating kind of the right muscles. But yeah, Nicole's done a lot of ultrasound. Dr. Nicole Rombach, she's done ultrasound with these caudal tail shifts and shown like how it's affecting postural muscles. So yeah, those ones. And I think this is probably the point at which I'll just share with you what I do with Jelly on a daily basis. Like, how do I incorporate all of these exercises? So Jelly's obviously my horse that I ride and have. But how do I incorporate all these exercises for him? So before I ride, I saddle him up, blah, blah, blah. I walk him out. As I'm walking, I'm aware of how he's walking, what his posture is, have I noticed any tight areas when I picked out his feet, done up his girth, etc. Then I go out and I do caudal tail shifts, make sure that he's loading both hind legs symmetrically, that I can see both glutes filling and activating, that he doesn't feel like he's pulling against me, that he's like happy to kind of do that little half squat. Then I'll do pelvic rounding activation. So I'll check his pelvic motion in extension and flexion. Belly lift activation. So I check, yep, belly's good. And base of neck activations as well. So I basically checked his posture in doing that, and where he's at on that day. If that's all good, I hop on, I have my ride. If I'm going to do lengthenings, then I'll do them after the ride, especially after a long ride. So chin between the knees or nose to toes and beyond, lateral flexions, limbs if I can. Like, I'm a bit challenged with limbs due to my body, but like any specific limb ones for him on that day, like hips psoas would be good. And yeah, if I wanted to do, like, I guess I'm doing my mobilizations with my activations before I ride. So, and if I find any problems, then I'll use mobilizations or other techniques to like alleviate that. So that's kind of my general program. And you need to know, when are you going to use what and why you're using it, and how you're going to monitor the progress within your horse. What else is important takeaway messages?
I think understanding that, for me, just me personally, understanding that the small niggles and feelings that I feel in my own body, from my knee feeling a bit funny sometimes, and once I tried to drag a pole back with my left foot, and that, for me, that would be the action of a horse, going backwards and dragging a foot, caused me a lot of like momentary pain in my SI. And I'm a pretty strong, reasonably fit individual. And I still have small things, and when I work on them, they improve. And it's worth thinking and understanding that your horse is really in their body and they do feel these things, and all of these tools and understanding what they are, what your aim is before you go in to do what you're going to do. And that's where knowing what these are and deciding, am I about to go out and do a round and I'm trying to create my horses, be mobile to go over the jumps. I'm not going to hold their limbs for 60 seconds and things like that. So, choosing what's appropriate for the horse in the moment, and also being empathetic to the fact that they feel what's in their body. And, there is a lot of value in using these.
Yeah, and understanding that, we're retraining the muscle patterns and we're retraining the brain
Yeah,
and the nervous system within that as well. And that takes time, stuff doesn't just happen overnight. And that's what we're constantly telling people in the equine functional posture course. Like at the start, it's really hard, feel like you're getting nowhere, but it's like, just keep going. And make sure you're well supported with a good team, which we talked about in the last episode. And do things like the equine functional posture course so that you can, aid in your knowledge there, so that you can understand how to do these and you can receive feedback from practitioners and things, whether you're doing them correctly within your horse's comfort and capabilities.
absolutely.
So on that note, I think we'll sign off. So thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler, and Sophie Vandenberg in today's podcast. It's obviously a pretty passionate topic for both of us.
Yep.
We'd love you to subscribe to this podcast, Equine Functional Posture Podcast, so you don't miss our weekly episodes. You can find all the links to our socials in the comments, and remember to join the next Equine Functional Posture course to create transformation in your journey with your horse.
See you in the next exciting episode.